I'm Dean Newlund, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation. Hi, my name is Dean Newlund, and I am so excited. This is our very first episode for a brand new, renamed podcast called Leadovation. As you all have known, those of you who are out there, we've had probably 240 plus different episodes by another podcast called The Business of Intuition, which we'll explain about more in the next few minutes. But I wanted to introduce a very important, very special person in my life. Of course, she's my wife, but she's also my best friend, my business partner, the person who helped birth this entire company 32 years ago, Joanne Newlund. So Joanne, welcome to our very first edition to Leadovation.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. This is an interesting and exciting forward movement for us, another step in delivering the message of intuition and how we incorporate it into our lives and in the businesses. I'm looking forward to what comes up.
Yeah, this conversation that Joanne and I, we have talks all the time with ourselves. We call them tub talks, where we sit out in the hot tub and we talk about all things spiritual, business, and everything in between. And so we thought it would be great to get the two of us back together again and talk about what this new podcast is all about, why we're doing it, and what's the benefit for people to be able to listen in on it. So first and foremost, let me give you a quick history lesson for those of you who are new. What was the business of intuition all about, and how did it get inspired? Well, somewhere around, 2020, I think it was, Joanne, 2019, I was able to do a TED Talk in beautiful Bend, Oregon, on the topic of why business should use intuition or needs intuition now more than ever. It was a grueling and wonderful experience to have 20 minutes of fame in front of 400 people standing on a white, yellow, red dot, whatever it was, and try to get a message across regarding intuition. And I learned so much in that process. And it just gave me a sense that really, if we are able in our personal lives and in our business lives to have the freedom and the wherewithal to really trust and use our intuition, we will not only make better decisions, but we'll forge real connections with people that will be meaningful, and we'll be able to follow a sort of a compass that maybe we wouldn't have before. The full human being gets to show up. And so I was really inspired by that talk, and I kept thinking, we got to get intuition out of the closet and into the boardroom somehow. And so that's what the reason was for the talk. It was a lot of fun. It's still out there on YouTube, so if you'd like to listen to it, please do. And then we started this podcast because I thought we want to continue this conversation because it was so much fun. And we ended up starting this podcast as a result of that particular TED Talk. And we called it The Business of Intuition. And it's just been an amazing journey. I've always tell people, I think a few people are learning a few things out there because I'm being told that. But I know I've learned an absolute 2 or 3 graduate degrees in all sorts of things, not just intuition, but strategy, change management, leadership, all sorts of other things, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So it's just a delightful time. We really are excited about this new step into our evolution. And we'll explain here in a second why we decided to move from the business of intuition to Leadovation. So when I think about the last, 240 different interviews we've had, which I can't believe it has gone by so fast. It's one a week, every Tuesday at 8 a.m. There's been some amazing insights, at least I've been able to pick up. And Joanne, I want you to chime in as well. But one of the first things was that intuition as a concept was not as foreign as I thought it would be for people. There was a lot of people out there that wanted to talk about it, and quite frankly felt that we had a pretty good take on this topic when it comes to how to apply it in business. We're trying to take sort of the woo-woo out and make it a real business practice. I remember one of our CEOs, Joanne, you and I have talked about him, a healthcare company, said, we got to start letting intuition be a part of our decision-making process, because when we let intuition in the room, so to speak, then the whole person starts to show up. Because normally what happens, as you know, is that subject matter expert is the only person who can talk, and anybody else who has a hunch, an idea. Think about the Challenger explosion, right? I have a hunch, an idea that maybe this O-ring won't work. We need to be able to get the whole person to show up. And all of a sudden, now we have engagement, we have inclusion, we have better decisions.
Well, and how many times have we, in the course of our coaching careers, had conversations with people that, when directly asked, said, I had a feeling that there was something wrong, or I had a feeling that that wasn't the right thing to do. And because we are taught to be rational and logical, we very often just ignore it. And as a matter of fact, Google, when you look up intuition, the definition that they use is the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. It's a conscious reasoning that kicks in and sabotages that connection. And I have maybe a little bit different perspective on intuition. I see it operating in all of these podcasts and all of the conversations we have, both with our coaching clients and those that you interviewed on the podcast, in so many different ways. But intuition is that knowing without conscious reasoning. It's also, we have the brain, which is a processor, and we have the mind, which is the repository of the billions of bits of information that we receive weekly throughout the course of our lives. And once we step beyond that reasoning, that frontal lobe, the reasoning piece, we're able to connect to those billions of bits of information much more rapidly. And so it seems like it's without conscious reasoning, but it's still using our capacity of and what our brain and our mind do together. So it's not woo-woo really when you think about it. It's using what we have, this tool of our brain, of our mind, of this incredible thing that we have between our ears. It's not just a bunch of gray matter. And they always say that we only use 5% or some ridiculous amount. I don't know if that's right, because how can you tell? But set that aside for just a second here. And I think that we use it so much more than we give ourselves credit for, because again, how many people have we talked to who have an experience and they're being guided to do the next step and they're not sure why. And when they get there and look back on it, all of a sudden it's like, I have no idea why I did that. That just made sense.
Yeah.
Well,
and you work with a lot of mid-level managers and vice presidents in companies. I seem to sort of hang out with the CEOs for some reason or not. And I keep hearing that the higher up you go in an organization, the more intuition becomes important. How many, you just said this, we've had coaching clients who said, I had to let somebody go. How long did you have them on? Well, 2 or 3 years. Well, go back to the moment you hired them. What was your gut? What did it tell you then? And is it the same thing as telling you now? And invariably, it's the same message. We probably shouldn't pick up this person. I don't know why. It just doesn't feel right. So I think that intuition is a way to really make better decisions and get them done faster than we have in the past, right? So as I think about some of these episodes we've had, what has been interesting is that they haven't all been about intuition. We've had shaman, and we've had karate masters, we've had therapists, we've had coaches, but we've also had business leaders and authors. We've had people from a variety of different industries. I'm thinking about this guy named Gerardo Sagat, I think I pronounced his name correctly. He's got this wonderful job of living between Switzerland and Italy. And he told me in this podcast recently that on weekends he does helicopter skiing. And I went, oh my. And he was such a delightful, cheerful man. I mean, his face just sort of exuded love and light. And I said, so what are you all about? He says, well, I'm going to the Economic Forum this year, 2024. And I said, so what is a facilitator trainer doing at this World Economic Forum? He goes, well, I'm going to help these people connect to their heart before they make these big decisions. And so we had 3 or 4 basic questions that he asked these people to connect with and to connect with each other on. And I found that so wonderful that I've used those 4 questions with some of our facilitations. And it's been a great way of bringing people back to their humanity. That's a great little tidbit I remember we picked
It's
up
incredible.
on.
And when you were saying the interviews aren't always about intuition, they may not be directly, but when you listen to people's stories, you start recognizing that speaking of humanity, that there's a piece that connects us. There's an inspiration. They had to decide to do what they're doing somehow. It wasn't that they were just born and they knew from the time they were 3 years old. It's the step-by-step process. And what guides you to the next step? What is that voice that pushes you to that next step? Intuition shows up in so many different ways. I think the difference is we don't have a lexicon. We don't have the experience or the vocabulary, even in our conversations, to help identify what that actually is. It's a much more expanded concept. It's not this small. The popular culture has defined it a certain way. I would like to say that it needs to be, the definition and the understanding needs to be expanded beyond that relatively narrow train track that it's been going on for the last 10 years.
I was talking to, I remember working with a chair of neuroscience over at Mayo Clinic, and we were talking about this before the business of intuition was born. And I was trying to pick his brain, no pun intended, around this topic. And he said, yeah, intuition resides in the part of the brain that does not have language.
Yes.
Which is fascinating because so it doesn't show up as words. It shows up as a gut feeling, or the back of your neck starts to tingle, or your hair on your arm starts to do a little dance, or a voice in your head, that it shows up in different ways. And that I thought was fascinating. Absolutely. So a couple other quick, things I wrote down about who really stuck out. And there's so many of them. So I remember Brian Murray. Brian Murray is the CEO of Ryan Companies based out of Minneapolis. They're a family-owned company. They're over 100 years old. And Brian was on the show. And I was so proud to be able to give him our 2nd annual Excellence in Leadership Award, which we started back in 3 years ago. And Brian went on to do a TED Talk himself, I think up in North Dakota, all about vulnerability. And here's the CEO of the multi-billion-dollar company, a male, by the way, who's talking about depression and talking about isolation and talking about fear and talking about the effect that it has on him and other people. I just loved his leadership lesson around being able to share that kind of vulnerability. I've seen Brian in action in front of his senior team, and on one hand, literally well up with tears and talk about something so gut-wrenchingly personal, and then 4 hours later, kicking people's ass for not following through on their commitments, all in the same day. And I thought that's a rare leader. So that was somebody that really stuck out with me. We've had Joanne Matthews, who actually is a friend of ours, lives up in Bend, Oregon. She's done some work with us, but she was on the show, had a very popular podcast on public speaking. That doesn't exactly connect with intuition, but it was a great show. And people kept coming back to me over and over again, says, I got to listen to that podcast because I learned such great things from her. There's Janine Capozzi, who also has started working with us. She brought us this whole area around designing training programs using what she calls gamification, and using the principles of playing games into training programs that allow for greater retention for those who are participating. And it brings me back to my days of theater and simulations and all that sort of stuff. So, just some incredible people. I could go on and on. Todd Laporte, Tim O'Neill, David Carter, Justin Zorn, and Lee at Mars. They wrote a book called Golden, all about being present, being in the moment, which of course goes back to presence, purpose, and play, which is the 3-part process we talk about with the TED Talk that I did around intuition. So I'm just very, very humbled and so appreciative of all these hundreds of people who have dedicated their time and their energy to be a part of this conversation around the fullness of the human experience on a topic called intuition, even though we may not always call it that.
It's a slice of life, right? And speaking of humbling, it's an amazing, I think the podcast, one of the big side benefits is recognizing the incredible creativity and talent that's out there. In our day-to-day lives, we don't always necessarily connect with it. We may connect with one person one day and then another day connect with someone else. But when you listen to these podcasts, it's one after the other, these talented, amazing people with perspectives that are so valuable. And we all have that in us. That's the amazing piece. And that's where I think that the podcast gets to highlight and point out to other people what possibilities are. And I kind of always look at the podcast as, look, people, look at these amazing people here. They're doing things, but they're following their bliss. They're following what they feel called to do. We all have the ability to do that, right? It's one of the things that it's what brought me into coaching, to be able to support people at a level of where they want to be. And it's about holding the space for these people to step in an expanded picture of them that they can then choose to or not step into, but giving them the opportunity to see themselves in a different way. So when you're watching these podcasts, it's as much for the information that's being delivered as the inspiration of there's people out there doing it. And these are not extraordinary people. They're wonderful human beings. But the point is, it's everyone. We all have this in us.
So I would make a quick call out to you, Joanne, because I've obviously known you quite a long time. But one of the things that I always think that there are people who have
12, we met when I was 12. And no, that
yeah.
that's not true.
So there's people who have a strong intuition and yet never use it.
Correct.
Like there are people who are fantastic writers who never get published. And so you have a great sense of intuition. You tap into things all the time. And what I so appreciate about you is your courage to be able to tell people what it is that you know in a way that they can hear it. And so you have this really quite remarkable ability to know what you feel and sense through your intuition, at the same time be able to communicate it to a person. And sometimes what you are telling people is not all roses. It could be tough information to hear. But I actually see that you, more than most that I have ever met on the planet, sees the best in people beyond even what they can see in themselves. And that's why people love you. That's why people love being your client. Being your client and being able to work with you is because they know that you are seeing things in themselves that they forgot. And I so appreciate that about your work.
Thank you. Wow. You know, one of the things that I'm struck by as you were giving that incredible variety of accolades, I really appreciate you, is that in order to do that, a person has to commit to being present, to actively making a connection. It's not about when you're connecting to your intuition, it isn't about you anymore. It's about that other person. It's about creating that space that I was talking about and allowing and knowing that when I come into a coaching session, I don't think about using intuition. I just always do because it's the way I'm connected. But one of the things that I do intentionally do is remind myself that this connection is about the other person. And I see them as that expanded being that they are and the potential. That's what I do to connect to the intuitive place between the two of us. It's holding the space for the potential. And that takes a choice. You have to make that decision. They call it now, the buzz is active listening. It just is intentional listening. It's paying attention. It's getting outside of yourself to put yourself with that other person. So thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It's easy to give you compliments like that. I'll finish this little segment by saying I was over in, I guess it was Texas last week. And somebody says to me, so tell me about your business, blah, 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 blah. And I says, well, we do a lot of 360s. And who does that? He goes, well, my wife, Joanne, she's really manages all of our 360s. And I don't know, this year we're doing probably 25 really big ones. And then she's got a whole practice and people just love her. And he goes, wait a minute, you work with your wife? And I go, yeah, actually, we started the business together back in 1992. He goes, all right. He gives me a little fist bump. He goes, I want to hear more about that. Because he was really like, tell me about how that works. Because obviously his comment was sort of opening a whole Pandora's box around whatever was going on with he and his wife. They would never work. But for us, it's sort of like, well, of course it is. I mean, our life and our business is so interfolded together, during cooking dinner, going to the grocery store, traveling to some other part of the country, the world, we'll talk about family, we'll talk about a great restaurant, and then we'll bring up a client, and then we'll bring up, oh, these shoes are cool, and then, oh, watch out for the duck ready to hit the car, and then we'll go on to a client. It's all over the place. And that's just the way we are. And it does come back to that principle of, and I do, deeply appreciate the fact that we found each other when we did, is seeing the best in each other. And I think that not only do you do that very well for your clients, but I believe we do that well for each other. We hold that space. So if I start getting too sappy and start needing the tissue, maybe you should close this out. We'll move on to the next conversation.
I do have one more thing to say.
All right.
And that is that we made the decision early on when we weren't making a whole lot of money and we were still building the business. First of all, that we wanted to work together because we really like each other a whole lot. I mean, we really are best friends and we appreciate each other and we've grown together. And so for us, it's not a burden and we love what we're doing. But the thing is, we made the decision early on that whatever business we created, we were going to be creating an environment that was what we taught. It's the same that we project from the outside is on the inside. It's seamless. And that we practice the same principles in our weekly meetings with our people, that we create an environment where people can say what they need to say. And we're not going to get all, like, oh, I can't handle that. I can't hear that. Don't tell me anything bad. We're creating an environment where we all get to show up as long as it's with respect and caring. So I think that we've done that. And I know for sure that when you step into a facilitation, the work that you do prior to walking into that facilitation is as important as the work that you do when you get in there. And that is to prep yourself to be available, both physically present and emotionally available, and that connecting that intuition to watching the crowd. We used to, when we started early on, we had this partnership where we'd go to facilitations together and I would do the watching the group and monitoring, and Dean would actually do the facilitating. And then we chose for me to step out for a period of time to raise our son. And you ended up taking that on your own. And you've done it seamlessly. So you do that intuitive piece. You make that intuitive connection. And the thing is, it's not, for us, it's not different or unusual because we do that in our daily lives as well. But again, it's because we made those choices as we went along, right?
No, yeah, you articulated it really well. I have never really heard it that way, but our marriage really is, the intention of our marriage is really the intention of our work. And it's an authentic, seamless, hopefully, mirror of one another. And that's why I think it's so well interconnected is that we really do work hard. I shouldn't even say hard. We really do walk the talk.
Yeah. And we're human. I mean,
but of course, we're like anybody else. So the question is then, all right, we've had this wonderful ride with the business of intuition. We've got 240 some odd interviews. Why change the name? Why go from the business of intuition to Leadovation? And I think for me, Joanne, chime in when you have something to add to this, but I remember somewhere along the way when we were doing the podcast, it became clear to me that some of the things that I took for granted were brand new concepts to people. And maybe it's just because of my age and I've been at this business for 32 years. The old is becoming new again. And I felt that was really important to be aware of, that the generation that we are trying to influence is probably not the 50 and 60-year-olds. Yes, to some degree, but it's the newer leaders who are coming into, those HR positions, those mid-level manager positions. Those people are those who are going to be leading our companies in the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And of course, we're going to be addressing, the unique perspectives of those who are later in their career. But it became really clear to me, like, wow, the stuff that we know that we take for granted, like our phone book, even our phone book, like our phone number is something that's brand new to people. So that really kind of caught my attention. And then on top of that, I've been obviously very aware that one great quote that we've heard before by a guy that wrote Shift Happens said that the speed of change right now is the slowest it's going to be for the rest of our lives. Okay, that's scary, but that's exciting. And of course, now in the last, year or so, we've got this huge change that's happening with AI and ChatGPT, and companies are going crazy with their investors pouring in a bunch of money. And the way we're doing business right now is very different than it was even just 6 months ago. Even, Joanne, even in our little company, we're using ChatGPT almost on a daily basis.
This is so true.
We created a T-shirt, and I asked ChatGPT to create the logo for the T-shirt. It's like, done. Let's do it. So now you've got these age-old, timeless principles that have been around for a long time that are bedrock to the human condition. At the same time, the context is different because the world is so different. Because one, we have new technology. We're in a social situation with multiple generations working all together, maybe for the first time in recent memory. We've got grandfather and mother age people working together with people who are in their 20s and everything in between. And each level having its own different needs and expectations for work and connection and communication and decision-making, all happening at the same time. And we got these brand new things going into play with ChatGPT. We've got what our friend David Carter, based out of our wonderful country of England, said to us over dinner once. Yeah, we're being fed a lot of fear porn. And as, kind of disruptive as that comment is, there's a certain amount of truth to the fact that we have to work against the tide of fear and the tide of doubt and break free from that. And you and I have had our own Tub Talks about why are we here? What are we here to do?
Right.
What is our purpose? And our purpose is probably to help people to get past the fear into the light, into the highest and best of themselves.
Absolutely.
And so I think that when all of this started to come together, we went, you know what? Intuition is always going to be a backbone to what we do, but it's not the only thing we do. It's almost like a vehicle for all sorts of other things. And on top of that, if you just listen to what people want to talk about, look at the guests we've had. They haven't all talked about intuition. They're talking about change management and marketing and strategic planning and leadership and conflict resolution and decision making. And so if you just listen to what people are telling us, they're telling us, we want, yes, intuition, but we want more. We want more than just that. We want other tools, Dean. Can you provide us that aside from this idea around intuition? So if we listen to what our audience is telling us, we needed to make a game change. We needed to make a name change. And I think leadership has always been one of those words that we resonated with. And it's not leadership based on title. It's leadership based on attitude and skills and competencies and mindset. And then in innovation, I think is that you have to innovate today. You have to learn faster than your competition or you're going to fall behind. And so it's, if you stay present, if you don't move, you're going to slowly decline. So innovation is going to allow us to keep up with the speed of change. Innovation is going to allow us to get through this fear porn that David Carter talks about. Innovation is going to help us align with other people and create that creativity. And innovation happens in part because of our connections with each other and the combined intuitive soup that we create together. Intuition brought together by all these different people creates breakthrough innovations. And that is just exhilarating to be around. So that's why leadership and innovation coming together needs to be what this new podcast title is about. So add to that.
It's also about helping to identify and support and create the mindset that then supports that innovation. Because innovation can even be just the discovery of a new idea. But innovation is an active word. It's the process of implementation. It's the process of creating. And that happens creating a mindset. If you don't innovate with the same old mindset that put you where you were before the innovation, you create a new mindset to support that growth and expansion. And that's part of what this podcast is about also. Let's have a conversation about that. Where do
Absolutely.
we to support that innovation, that creativity, that expansion beyond what we knew last week or last year?
Yeah, and I think that there's some biological headwinds towards innovation. There is, like you could say, okay, you got to learn faster than your competition. The world is changing at a rate that we've never seen before. Heck, Joanne, your dad was born at a time in which the streets of his hometown not only had cars, but horses.
Yep.
That's 100 years ago. That's amazing that would happen. Nor have we ever seen that amount of change happen in the history of the humankind in such a short amount of time. So you think, okay, all of this sort of sounds exhilarating, but it sounds scary at the same time, because let's face it, change is tiring. The human brain needs rest. The human brain gets very tired. 20% of our entire caloric output is in our brain, so it gets tired. Hence, that's why we do what we do to rest, and maybe some of the things that we do that isn't necessarily as healthy, but we do it to be able to create that, that peace, right? And so along all of that, this sort of goal towards change and innovation and speed, and yet the brain is telling us, whoa, I'm tired. Whoa, I'm a little freaked out. Whoa, I got work-life balance issues. Wow, I'm putting in another 70-hour week. Whoa, I'm beginning to feel the burnout, Oh, and I'm also disconnected from all of you because I'm spending so much time in meetings, and I don't connect with people in a real human way because of Zoom meetings, and we've forgotten the art of the conversation, and all of these things are happening. And so I think as we begin to really go into this new phase of this podcast, and we talk about leadership and innovation in the backdrop of change being what it is, that we have to be very mindful, that we have to be able to pace ourselves. We have to be able to create those meaningful connections with people. Vivek Murthy, our current Surgeon General, has a book called Togetherness, and he has some very stark data that's saying that the loneliness and isolation that's becoming an epidemic in our society has very physical manifestations towards our health and our longevity. So as we think about innovation and leadership, and knowing that we need to increase the speed by which we do both, we also have to be able to create meaningful connections with people. We have to be mindful of what creates a grounded, peaceful mind. We have to include things like meditation and be able to not be so much just doers, right? We got to be beers. And the being part is that holistic part, is that trusting the intuition, which is what we've had from the other podcasts, is bringing that intuitive side to say, yes, I know I need to do this and I want to do this, but now I'm going to take a nap or I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to have a connection with my beautiful wife or my son or what have you. These things help us, because in some ways, if we work so hard in this idea of being a leader and an innovative leader in the speed of change that it is right now, if we keep using that same tool of just effort, it is in some ways a self-fulfilling prophecy for failure.
Yes.
And that's why we need to be very mindful of this.
Yes. Life as a mind game. And I don't mean that as playing with people's emotions. It's you have to start making some choices about how you're going to hold a situation. We had a tub talk. Actually, this time it was a float talk about the presence, the concept. And the idea of that is that play, presence, and purpose but play comes into that in for so many reasons. You have to take the time to allow yourself to play, to be able to refill yourself. However you see that. Playing may be sitting there reading a book, but it's about making choices, intentional choices to be able to fill your cup. And also the whole idea of presence. When you come up with a new concept, you're talking about that burnout with this pace of change. I think that at least part of that has to do with new ideas coming at you. At least I'll speak for myself. New ideas coming at me and me trying to absorb them. And the first thing that my brain, the processing part of the brain, not the mind that makes all these connections, but the processing part goes, wait, this is too fast for me. It's got to slow down. I think that we need to step maybe beyond the processor and just experience these things and then take the time to process through. And that's what I'm hoping that the podcast can do in part, is to be able to create an environment where that dialogue, the more people hear about these concepts, the more they are able to understand them. And I heard an old word used in a podcast just the other day. The more you grok that, it's a terrible word, but it's about fully understanding, fully taking in the concept. Grok.
We're not talking about avocado dip here. Or something that I stepped in.
I should have never used this word. We're going to go down the rabbit hole, aren't we, Newlund? Okay.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Fully embracing a concept. It's the more you're able to embrace something or even understand it, the less it stresses you out. It's when you just start getting these new concepts, your processing brain goes, oh, too much, and it starts pushing back. So if we can create an environment where there are conversations about all of these new concepts and new ideas so that people can hear them more than once and they can start feeling more familiar with it, and there'll be less resistance in the processor and more acceptance. And then it's not as hard to work that way. And
like resistance as stress.
Yes. And here's my position. And we talk about this a lot in coaching. And that is brain science is an amazing thing these days. In the last 20 years of brain research and science has led us in unbelievable places, but it's also led us to the place where we know practically nothing. But the places it has taken us to, what we do know is that there are certain ways that you can sort of hack once you understand the process and how it works, you can sort of hack those. And one of the things about the processing part of the brain is the too much in new information is going to shut it down. And so if we can actually hack it by saying, all right, I'm just going to listen to this new information and just sort of let it flow over me. And then I'm going to come back and listen to it a second time later. But right now, I'm just going to let it flow over me. You would be absolutely amazed at the amount of information that ends up in the mind part, those billions of bits of information that you take in each day that you can eventually, by going past the processor, connect with. So just a small little brain hack, but we'll talk about all this stuff.
Yeah, so I think this is a great segue into what can people expect from this new and improved 2.0 version of our podcast. And I really think that, Joanne, you teed it up really well to say that it's going to include hacks and tips and tools and stories and anecdotes and real world examples about how people are being able to survive and thrive and lead and innovate in the time in which speed is the fastest it has ever been, knowing that the brain does not operate as fast as the external environment would want it to. How do we navigate all this? How do we have families and be successful in our careers and enjoy our life and make a contribution and live our life's purpose? All of that in this crazy kind of world we live in. How do we do that? And that's what this podcast is all about, is really getting some great dialogue. And we're going to learn a ton. And we're going to bring in some people who are experts in this, who have great insights. What's that?
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I am too. I am really excited about this. So in closing, we're both very excited about having this new chapter in our podcast life. Leadovation. The three words that we really use to describe it is reimagine, facilitate, and flourish. We will have Joanne be a part of this conversation occasionally, and we'll bring in some people, authors and coaches and experts in a variety of different fields. But again, is around what are those major tips, tools, hacks, examples of ways that people can understand to what you just said, be inspired by what they learn, and have the tools to implement it. That's what the purpose of this podcast is about.
Thank you for listening to Leadovation with Dean Newlund. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com, or check the show notes. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. Transform your leadership success with Leadovation.